All right, so I rediscovered the existence of Miyamoto Musashi. And it was literally, I was watching a YouTube video about Vinland Saga, Berserk, and Vagabond. And there is a connection between all three of them, which is a sort of brute to pacifistic to honorable warrior direction, sort of, or a calming while remaining skilled in combat and courageous sort of situation. And it's about less of the emphasis on the capability for violence and an emphasis on the purpose of violence, sort of. I want to say each of these three characters basically retains all their skills from before and so on. And Berserk and Vagabond, they never stop fighting, but they changed their reasons for fighting. Whereas Thorkel from Vinland Saga sort of gets good at fighting for revenge and then goes pacifist completely and then picks up fighting again to defend the weak and so on, and the innocent and so on. In a sort of like a fist fighting instead of a stabbing people to death kind of way. So Vinland Saga gets a little quote-unquote boring after a while because all the fighting doesn't exist and it's a little more character-driven for a while at least. Whereas Berserk is a through and through fighting mystical monsters and so on. But Vagabond is, I think, a lot more realistic because the person drawing it focused on possible movements that a human could actually do, and there's no supernatural element to it. It's not shown in manga super moves. It's not supernatural powers. It's not magic. It's just people fighting and so on. And Vagabond is a story about Miyamoto Musashi. And I've just finished listening to about 25 minutes, 20 minutes of the Book of Five Rings, and I'm reminded by his... there's actually two elements to this which figure into my situation, sort of. Now, I have personally taken down 3 people within the space of a maximum of 2 minutes in fighting. So I know I've got the technical capability to take down people really quickly in groups and win against at least 3 people, because I've done it before. I've also taken down 2 people at once, and so on. When Miyamoto Musashi says, when you know what you're doing, you can take down 10 people who don't know what they're doing, or kind of know what they're doing, I think he's mostly talking about using a choke point, like a doorway, so they can only come at you one at a time, and you can basically easily kill one guy, then the next comes, you easily kill him, the next guy comes and you easily kill him, until all 10 people are dead. Because you automatically win 1 versus 1 when you're skilled enough, and so on. So as long as your endurance keeps up in a sword fight, if you can easily kill off a guy and prevent him from harming you one-on-one, then you can keep doing it 10 times in a row, basically, as exactly the same kind of fight 10 times in a row. Alternatively, if you have 5 to 10 stupid cowards who are weak, and you brutalize one of them and really show punishment and the consequences of fighting you, what I've learned is that the 4 to 9 other people of similar nature suddenly don't want to fight you anymore, basically. They there's a YouTube video that's like 5 versus 1, expectation versus reality, or movie versus reality. And for the most part, most people actually are the first situation, the movie situation, if the person is good at fighting and strong physically and quick physically, and mentally focused on the fight. One person can take down 5 people reasonably easily if they're coming at them one by one. The second video clip in that little YouTube video is of 5 people synchronizing perfectly, and one person blocks and then moves out of the way so someone can jump kick the one person, and then someone comes in with the fist right after and punches them in the face and knocks them down, and then they take the pipe or stick that the one person is using, who's a woman, and beat her with it while kicking her while she's down, and so on. And it's all synchronized and so on. Both of them are synchronized. But what I found personally is that the first situation for a man who's strong and fast and focused and disciplined is actually more realistic than the second one. If you're in a situation where 5 people can synchronize as well as that second situation, you're screwed and you're not fighting normal people, basically. There's a little bit of truth to it. I've experienced that. I've technically lost a fight where 2 people synchronized a little bit by coming at me from opposite sides and so on. But at the same time, I wasn't trying very hard to fight. And I've never lost a fight I was really serious in winning, basically. Serious about winning, basically. You know, I was... And in that one situation, I basically kind of let them punch me in the head a little bit. Like, it was difficult because I had a backpack that was about the extreme of what I could move with at all. And their punches didn't hurt. So I was like, oh, whatever, you know, I'll fall, you know, like I lost my balance basically trying to punch one of them, and I'm rusty at fighting and so on, so that's part of it too. But basically, I kind of didn't mind getting punched in the head too much because they were weak. So basically what I did was I started grabbing their shirts and pulling them down, trying to pick myself up a little bit, and also like tear their shirts to punish them for punching me, you know. So it was like, you know, a little different mentality a little bit. But and maybe I'm just getting old. Maybe that's what happened. Maybe I'm just getting old and slow and weak and stuff like that. But I was, again, I had my backpack on, which was really heavy for me at the time and so on, so I couldn't move. Like, it physically restrained my ability to move around, kind of, and like it was heavy, so it was weighing me down. So I was like, okay, you know, fair enough, I guess, you know. But I don't think if I were without the backpack on at that exact moment, I would have lost that fight. In all honesty. But I screwed up in the fight, technically speaking, because I let the opponents come at me from opposite sides. So I wasn't following Miyamoto Musashi's thing of choke point and keep it one-on-one in that fight. But that's an example of a little bit of synchronization that can happen at times. The example Mobile Suit Gundam gives, the 1979 or something anime series that started the Gundam franchise, is the Black Tri-Stars, and some sort of super move where they all synchronize exactly right so that no matter what you do, you can't beat them at all. Maybe it was Mobile Suit Gundam Zeta or something, or maybe it was Mobile Suit Gundam the original. I think it was the original. But it's not very often that you have that level of synchronization amongst unskilled and untrained fighters and so on. But it does exist a little bit, sort of, even in chimpanzees and stuff, which is one of those things where people gang up on you and so on. But, you know, a skilled fighter who's unencumbered and quick on their feet and strong and focused and disciplined and skilled and trained can often move amongst untrained fighters with a lot of devastation against individuals and without much damage being done to them, at least in fistfights and stuff. It's almost like a lion being attacked by multiple hyenas, except with a lion, what I noticed in one of the nature videos of a lion being attacked by like 20 hyenas is the lion would never dedicate himself on killing a hyena when he was surrounded by 20 of them. So he was on the defensive, and he was focused on preventing a hyena from nipping at him, but he was getting nipped at anyways. And really, the thing is, the second lion came along, and they both scared off the hyenas after taking a couple down, basically, very hard. And the lesson there is, sometimes the best defense is a good offense. Sometimes the best way to prevent harm being done is to take down the enemy as soon as possible, as fast as possible, and as hard as possible. This lesson is also learned in the Battle of Marathon, where the Athenian army fought a Persian invasion fleet at one point on a beach or something, and then they marched all the way home to prevent the Persian pincer move landing of a second fleet from landing on their shores right beside Athens, the city proper. And the choke point thing is the Battle of Thermopylae with, like, I think historically it had about 3,000 soldiers total against like 200,000 or something, or like 500,000 soldiers. And they held on for quite a while until they got encircled and outflanked and so on. And that's an example of choke points working very well with a strong fighter against weak fighters. So again, it's about, and that's what mobility is for. It's about the concentration of power and force, right? You hear about that, concentration of force, to win the battle with minimal damage, maximize damage done, minimize damage taken in that unique situation, then move on to the next and do exactly the same thing and exactly the same thing and exactly the same thing over and over again until you mop up the floor with the bigger force or the equal force or something like that. And basically, that's what attritional warfare basically is. It's a lot of small situations of concentration of force and so on. And the thing about artillery is it makes it more difficult for concentrations of actual soldiers without annihilating them. But again, if you don't have a concentration of artillery, then you cannot do it. And if your artillery and their artillery start sniping and counter-battering them, each other and so on, then again, it's attrition and so on. And then accuracy of explosive shells and reconnaissance and knowledge of where your opponent is matters. But mobility and concentration of force are historically the most prevalent doctrines for warfare there is. The ability to kill the enemy anywhere and to get there in time to kill them before they know what's hit them, basically. And that's one of the reasons why the Germans, the German army, I mentioned TIK history in one of my videos, and one of the things one of his battles was about is that initially, at least for a long time in the battle, it might have been Operation Crusader. I can't remember exactly the name of it, but it was Operation Crusader or the one after that, basically, where the Germans basically said, we're doing concentration of force or combined arms, which means we have something to counter anything the enemy has at any given time in equal numbers to anything they have. Whereas the British were like, we're only going to have tanks. And the Germans were like, we're going to have tanks, anti-tank guns, which are really efficient against tanks, and infantry to counter their infantry and their anti-tank guns. And the concentration of force and combined arms in that regard made the Germans destroy like twice as many British as the Germans. Like it was like a huge. It was like they won against like twice the size of the army through mobility and concentration of force and combined arms, which means you have something to counter anything they throw at you. You have more of it in one particular spot in the actual fighting, and you move around the battlefield, picking them off and dividing and conquering, as the Romans would put it. And that's one of the reasons why the Romans conquered the Gauls. It's one of the reasons why riot police win against rioters so often, because there's a lack of concentration of force. It's one of the reasons why, if you think about it in really physical terms, even like, it's one of the reasons why a 50 caliber bullet beats any given armor there is, right? It's concentration of force. You can have all the width and general area of protection of armor, but if a 50 caliber bullet can punch through the armor into the person, then a person covered head to toe in armor becomes a very expensive loss, because the concentration of force is one bullet that costs like 1/100th of the cost of the person and armor and so on. And that's literally the philosophy of warfare, basically. So yeah, just my musings on warfare and fighting and so on, from someone who's never been in a war or anything like that, so don't get me wrong, but I have fought fist fighting. I have won against 3 people, and I have won against 2 people in fights. And I did learn my fighting through no holds barred, try anything you want except for kick to the balls, fish hook, and eye gouges. Breaking someone's nose, possibly in a fight, was allowed in that kind of training, or sparring for fun and practice and training, getting better at fighting on purpose through painful, bloody, seeing stars when you get hit levels of sparring, almost like we were actually trying to beat the crap out of each other, because we actually were fighting between me and a friend. And the only thing that we basically said is no kick to the balls, no eye gouges, no fish hooks to the mouth, and if someone's down, you don't beat on them further. Everything else was allowed. You could even theoretically break someone's arm if they couldn't get out of the arm lock and so on, we basically said. So I have a couple credentials in these fighting things and so on. And also, I kind of practiced a bunch of these tactics and philosophies and principles and so on in playing Warcraft 3, 4 versus 4 consistently and so on. And as I was practicing these things, when I kept them in mind, generally speaking, I did some pretty strong plays, so that even if our side lost, the other team barely won, or we dominated them, or something like that. I'm not very good at strategy games. I'm not very good at fist fighting compared to some people, necessarily. I've never shot a gun and been accurate with it, although I've used a .22 before, technically speaking. I barely hit a big cardboard box at like 10 meters away. But, these are lessons learned from other people and so on. So I hope they help you in thinking about things. There's a book that might help explain some of the mentality, but it's not a book you can necessarily understand until you've had some of these kinds of experiences, maybe, or done something in a different field and kind of learned a little bit about it for a while and gotten a little better at it and so on, or gotten some life experience maybe, which is the Book of Five Rings. And then there's the 33 Strategies of War by Robert Greene. And that's kind of where I was taking ideas from to some extent for my Warcraft 3, 4 versus 4 experimental plays. Just trying the strategies out with them in mind for the hell of it and for fun and seeing if they were valuable and so on. And generally speaking, it depends on when you use them and what situation you're in. But if you can do them successfully, I found I had a higher win rate in 4 versus 4 than I had a loss rate by trying these strategies. And practice makes perfect. You have to practice so you understand the individual situations in which the individual strategies are good and so on. But nothing trains you like the real deal. The only thing is, if you're dealing with life and death situations, you don't want to be stuck in a life and death situation unskilled, because it's a pass or fail. And if you can get even the remotest sort of advantage by training in a safer environment where you're not guaranteed to die if you fail, then you want that advantage and so on. But the best fighters actually fought real battles, basically. Veterans, right? And that's one of the reasons why so much martial arts sucks at real fighting, because they don't do real fighting. They do touch tap. They're like, I technically touched you with my fist. That counts just as much as if you knocked me out with yours. It's kind of like ridiculous. And they have a lot of rules for how to kick, how to punch, how to tackle, how to grapple. And nothing will train you like the real thing, or the most realistic thing, where the only thing you don't do is you don't kick them in the balls, you don't eye gouge them, you don't fish hook their mouth, and you don't kick them when they're down. That'll teach you fighting on your feet, and it can hurt like hell, and it is actually dangerous, especially when you're adults and not teenagers or children, because the amount of muscle and force you can produce is enough to break bones and give concussions and so on, which are potentially lethal. But it is a good way to learn fighting if you want to be serious about it. If you need to learn fighting as a life or death thing, the best way to learn is by actually fighting. What can I say? And everything else is just... Personally, I apply strategy and stuff like that in role-playing games or strategy games or something like that for fun, not competitively or anything like that. But if I were to be competitive or do serious stuff, then I would be glad I've practiced a little bit and then could contextualize from the context of a video game with combined arms into a more specific alternative context in real combat and real armies and stuff. But it would not be identical, by the way. It would not be identical. But video games are not real life, obviously. But a little bit of practice at something that can mimic real conditions on some fundamental structural level is better than nothing, as long as you're realistic and don't expect the real life to play like a video game.